but I worry about what's going to happen to Europe, the unintended consequences, because a lot of those forces are going to come to Europe. They're going to settle in Europe, and they're going to try to claim Europe for themselves. And I look at the European elite, and I just find it so tragic.
Thank you so much, Ayan, for joining us. Now let's talk about the Green Party to begin with. They just won this big by-election result in a heavily Muslim-dominated seat. Why are the Green Party doing so well with Muslim voters?
I think like Zohran Mamdani in New York, they're exploiting the far left, which is the Red Alliance, with Islamist Alliance, which is the Green Alliance, Red-Green Alliance. They're telling the Islamists what they would like to believe, and they're telling the leftists what they're trying to believe. So in that particular election, what I thought was fascinating, and I think everyone else has catched on it, is God. They had leaflets in Arabic, in Bengali, and in Urdu. Those leaflets were all about Gaza. Just for people who are outside of the United Kingdom, like me, we're talking about local elections. We're talking about potholes, collecting trash, that sort of thing. It's been made all about what's happening in the Middle East in these foreign languages. That's what's on the leaflets. What's omitted out of the leaflets by the Green Party, that's the official name, even though they are Marxist, Maoist, is that they want to legalize prostitution. They want to legalize crack cocaine. They are all for LGBTQ. So imagine if you're homosexual in any Islamist context, you must hide yourself or you will be killed. And where the state is Sharia abiding, you will be thrown off from the tallest building. So they hid this, all of this information from the constituency that they were reaching, the markets that they were marketing to, which were the Islamists. And this is how it works. And then they would pivot to what some of my friends in America call the useful idiots, green leafy, I don't know. I don't want to call anybody out by name, but sort of the Notting Hill type of people who would think, I drink kombucha and I drink green juices and I don't eat meat and I care about the environment and therefore I vote for the Green Party. To those people, they would have a completely different marketing scheme. That is a Red-Green Alliance where the far leftists in Europe and America need demographics on the one hand, and they know that their demographics lie with these Muslim communities, and the Islamists who know how to mobilize the Islamist vote, they say, this is how you need to do it. So a young, blonde, vegan woman goes off to say, I represent you. It's all about Gaza. And they win the election. And the sitting government party, the Labour Party, held that seat, those seats, I suppose, from 1931. So there's been an upset. Just like the people of Greater Manchester, the Labour Party of Greater Manchester, as Joe has dropped. It's the same thing that happened when Zohran Mamdani won the vote in New York just a few months ago.
Why do voters in a seat in Manchester care about Gaza more than, say, like you say, fixing potholes or their local community or issues happening in Britain? Can we generalise and say that, Muslim voters, of which this seat was incredibly dominant, care more about these foreign policy issues than they do about the local stuff that impacts them?
I will say many of these voters, Muslim voters, to the extent that they actually understand what voting is, what elections are about, where they are, they do care about Gaza, and they do care about what's happening. They do hate Israel and the Jews because they are told every day, 5 times a day during the prayers, that they ought to hate Jews, Zionists, Israelis, the great Satan, little Satan, all of that. So on a theological level, that is the case, but you would say maybe if some of them have lived here, many of them have lived in the United States, in the United Kingdom, all over Europe, maybe they have changed their minds. And this brings me to what Matt Goodwin, one of the contenders, was drawing attention to, where he was saying there's this thing called family voting, where a large number of people walk into a booth together, which means a patriarch, the male who goes into the mosque, he's the one who's dictating where you place the X sign on voting, family, quote unquote, family voting. In other words, it's the individuals. If maybe they were left to their devices, maybe the woman would vote differently, if they even knew what voting was. But you see, we don't know. We cannot know. And the problem is because we have these ghettos. And that is the whole thing that explains, I think, the greatest significance of these two places is that the mobilization of a religious or ethnic vote, where there's somebody who's telling a large group of people who have citizenship and who have the rights to vote what to vote. This is a conundrum. And I think it's very important that we go back to the fact that the leaflets were not in English. They were in Bengali, in Urdu, in Arabic. You have a huge ghetto or huge ghettos in your country, in Britain, where people are being shepherded in large numbers in families and are being told that's what you need to vote for. We're talking about people who may not even know what voting is, what elections are, what democracy is, and so on.
You came from Somalia to the West, and I know that you had your own experiences dealing with these new concepts that you weren't used to, whether it was the infrastructure or the democratic system. I guess that same realization, that same adaptation to the West is occurring across Britain with lots and lots of Muslims who've moved from countries with such a different values and so on. Can you talk a bit about the role of women and the where women stand in the social hierarchy when it comes to voting and democracy? It's interesting that there's this view in Britain towards Muslim women that they have, agency and independence and so on, that they become very Western very quickly. Do you believe that's the case, that these people aren't, being influenced by their husbands in this way and they have that kind of agency?
I wouldn't use the word influence, because influence assumes that somebody may try to persuade you to do something, but if you don't want to do it, you can do something else. That is not the case for most women in these communities. For a teeny tiny amount of women, that may be the case, a handful. But for the majority of women in these communities, they have no say. And it's not about being influenced, it's about being coerced. They are told when to get married, who to get married to, when to go to school, if they will go to school, when to finish school, what they can wear, what they cannot wear, what they cannot eat, and so on and so forth. And of course, what they can and cannot vote. But I think for most people, the most important thing for Europeans to know about the position of these women is that they've been imported into Europe to have babies. It's all about their uteruses. You're going to have 7 children, 8 children, 9 children, 10 children. That's how it's done. And so I think it's time that we literally spell that out. A lot of these Muslim women are not happy with that situation. They want to get out of it. You can get out of it if you're not in an environment where the social control is so strong that someone is telling you, you cannot go to the cinema, you cannot put makeup, you cannot see this person, you've got to dress this way, you've got to do that. Hey, and now for you to get married. And who you get married to is determined by your male guardian, and who you get married to becomes your male guardian. And after that, your life is not in your hands. That is what it is to be a female in Europe.
Like you say, generally Muslim immigrants to the West have higher birth rates than the native population. But if you speak to demographers and people who study fertility, actually, once they start living in Britain for a while, their fertility also drops. And if you look at Pakistani Muslim communities, although they have higher fertility rates overall, it is slowly declining as soon as they come to the West for a myriad of reasons. So the idea that Muslims will, for example, take over Britain one day, if you speak to demographers, it's not likely because of this drop in fertility rate.
Stephen, that is a fairy tale I've been hearing forever. And I tried to push against that fairy tale. Yes, some westernized Muslim women and Muslim families, that's a sliver of the people who identify as Muslim. Those women, their fertility rate drops. If you fled from Iran in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, your fertility rate will be equal to that of European women. If you came from Morocco, from Turkey, and I'm talking about the rural areas, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, from Somalia, from Niger, from any other part, and you find yourself in the working class communities, those demographers who are mapping these things are not reaching you. This is what explains this crazy statistic that in places like London, the number one name for children is Mohammed. So we are told that maybe 1%, maybe 2% of the population of the United Kingdom is Muslim. Yet the most popular name is not Edward, not George, not Michael, not Stephen, but Mohammed. Explain that. What it tells me is that our demographers, that is the state-sponsored demographers, are adapting to the narrative that the state wants to put out. The state, whether it's the British state, the French state, the German state, the Dutch state, the data that they want to put out there is to reassure the public and say, the borders are open, people are coming, they're having babies, you can see how your neighborhoods are changing, but let me just reassure you, all of these people are just becoming like us. All these women are having as many children as you are having. It's a blatant state-sponsored lie.
And where do you see Britain going if the situation continues politically? The Green Party is obviously on the rise, so is Reform. With this demographic change and so on, what vision of Britain do you see in, say, 10, 20, 30 years' time, politically?
I don't want to talk about 10, 20 years' time. I want to talk about right now, which is the unintended negative consequences of Operation Epic Fury, which is what's underway right now. And this is it. There was something called the Abraham Accords. This was disrupted. That process was disrupted by October 7, 2023. Israel reacted in the most rational way that any state could, and so did, and I think I would say all the governments that were involved in that, which was to, yes, destroy or attempt to destroy Hamas, but go beyond Hamas in the Middle East and go to Iran, the Islamic or Islamist Republic of Iran. And what we're witnessing now is the destruction of that. The roots of radical Islam Shia Islam in the Middle East, and they're working together with Saudi Arabia, which is the roots of radical Islam in the Middle East. Where will those radical Islamists go once they're evicted out of the Middle East? They will go to a place where they think is friendly to them. They may go to Asia, they may go to Africa, but I think many of them will actually try and come to the West, where they have an infrastructure. Right now, we have an administration in the United States where we're aware of that. Our borders are sealed, and we're going to try and dismantle the existing Islamist infrastructure. But Europe, day 5, let me warn you, Stephen, this is my warning to the European leaders, and they're going to continue the conversation they have always had. This is the conversation that Islamists have, which is, in order to conquer the world and the West, should we go it the slow way, dawah? Should we go it the jihadi way? And they're going to say, the ones that they find in Europe will say, look at us, we win elections. It's the way that Erdogan, the president of Turkey, has paved. We can actually achieve state power simply by being patient. We have more babies than they have. We elect and put up for elections. We put our agenda forward. We have more money. We have, as long as we are committed. And they're faced off with an elite, a European elite that have no convictions, no moral compass. Because you can see with Keir Starmer and the others, when they were asked to honor the special relationship, the special British-US relationship, Keir Starmer, just because of that, the election outcome in Greater Manchester, he started to go this way and that way. They see that. They've been studying this for a long time. So they're just going to come in, and you're going to have a huge bulge of Islamists, demographically, financially, ideologically, in Europe. That is what I want. I actually want to use your platform, and I've spoken to a bunch of people before you to say, I'm Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I'm delighted with this Operation Epic Fury. I want what is absolutely the best for the people of Iran who've been suffering as long as they have suffered, the people of Israel. I'm an American. What is right for America? But I worry about what's going to happen to Europe, the unintended consequences, because a lot of those forces are going to come to Europe. They're going to settle in Europe, and they're going to try to claim Europe for themselves. And I look at the European elite, and I just find it so tragic.
After the Syrian civil war, we saw millions of refugees try and get into Europe and succeed because of Angela Merkel and other European leaders. Is your warning today that this war in Iran could lead to a flood of refugees and migrants from the Middle East, not even just from Iran, but from other countries whose governments are being destabilized? These people could all flood into Europe over the next few years.
They're already flooding into Europe. Let me break down the people who are flooding in as masses versus elites. The masses will arrive in these boats, and they'll arrive through these means that are always televised, people risking their lives over the Mediterranean, that kind of thing. But the elites are going to arrive in airplanes, private jets. They're going to arrive on yachts. They're going to arrive in every which way. And they're going to arrive not only with their money, but they're also going to arrive with the ideology and their influence. And they're going to make fantastic use of the infrastructure that already exists here. That's what I'm warning Europe against. If you ask me, what are you saying to the British government? I'm saying to the British government, the people who run Hezbollah, I'm talking about the people who run it, the elites, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Muslim Brotherhood, they're going to arrive, and they're going to find a home, hotels, everything is ready for them. And what will you do? Because they can mobilize in Arabic in Urdu and in Bengali, the large numbers of people that you have allowed to be cocooned into these mosques, Muslim centers, Islamic youth groups, neighborhoods and ghettos, what are you going to do about that? So if I was a European leader, I would close the borders right away. I would dismantle this infrastructure right away. America is not having them. The Middle East is not having them. The Middle East is getting rid of them. Islamists in the Middle East are going to be treated like the Nazis in Germany. They're going to become pariahs. Where will they go? They will not go to America. If they come to America, we know in America we have a problem and we're dealing with it. There's one continent that is not dealing with Islam problem. That is Europe.
Why is it in Britain's interest to bomb Iran? How does this specifically help Britain?
3 ways. The first is moral. Our conflict with Iran, as the Islamist regime of Iran has spelled out, is that it's a moral conflict. They frame it as it's between Islam and Judeo-Christianity. We have, on the moral level, to articulate and defend the Judeo-Christian principles against them. Territorially, we have to understand that we're being told territorially every Western territory is stolen land, decolonized land, exploited land, etc. And we have to defend ourselves against that economically and in terms of demographically. I think they boil it down to that, which is we're having more babies than you are. But there is no getting away from the moral, spiritual anchor versus the moral, spiritual seduction that they have for us that we see now being destroyed. When I was growing up, I was a little girl, and every day I was told about the fire and fury of the day of judgment. What I love about the title Epic Fury is that this fire and fury of the day of judgment is now visited upon the mullahs. That is what they were doing to the people of Iran and beyond. That's exactly what they were doing to us, and it's visited upon them. And it's America that is doing that. It's the administration of Donald Trump that is doing that. And I don't care how many people in the world have TDS, but I'm very grateful to the president for finally showing them what their day of judgment looks like.
A lot of people are comparing this attack or this war to the Iraq War in 2003, which I think is widely condemned today as being a war that failed ultimately. Iraq was in chaos, the nation building didn't work. Same with Afghanistan, the Taliban eventually came back after 20 years. America spent a huge amount of resources, blood and treasure in those wars to not really see the results that they were hoping for. And the same is being said of this war now, is that America doesn't have the tangible goals in mind. It's not willing to put boots on the ground so far, and it's destabilizing the region. It's causing economic problems with oil and gas prices. When will the war end? Do you see those comparisons with 2003 with Iraq and Afghanistan?
I understand why people are asking those questions and where they're coming from. But people like me for the last 25 years, so I speak for myself and people on the same page as I am in terms of ideas. And it is, there were those people who would frame the conflict in material terms. 9/11/2001, they said, happened because of American foreign policy, because of Israeli foreign policy. People on my side of the argument would say, no, it didn't. It's because of their conviction. If you look at the charter of the Islamic Republic of Iran, if you look at the charter of Hamas, They don't mention anything about economics and stuff like that. It's about a conviction. We, Islam, we have to dominate. And so I understand why their reading is, oh my gosh, based on the analytics, inspired by sort of the material side of things. We fear this and we fear that and we fear that. I totally understand it. But if you look at just empirics, it hasn't borne out. People on my side of the argument have won tragically, sadly. It doesn't give me any joy to say, I told you so. It doesn't give me any joy to do that. But 25 years ago, the problem was smaller. 47 years ago, the problem was smaller. But all the people in charge decided they were going to interpret it in the way that you frame it now. And I'm telling you now, what is different from the Trump administration, what makes the Trump administration different from all of these other administrations is they don't try and explain and project on the Islamist regime of Iran what they want to see. They simply look at what they are saying, and based on that, they act. The charter of the Islamic Republic says, we want to destroy the great Satan, which is America, the little Satan, which is Israel, and we will not stop until Islam dominates. That is the Shia version, and the Sunni version of Islamism is completely consistent with it. They are not going to stop it. To the Western mind, it's completely simplistic. It's completely stupid and suicidal. But that is what they're saying. And in 47 years, the only administration that takes them at their word is the Trump administration, and it's acting accordingly. And I am delighted, and so are the people of Iran, and so are the people of Israel, and so are many Americans who have been trying to get various administrations to see this reality. There is such a thing as good, absolute good, and there is such a thing as evil, absolute evil. That administration, the Islamist regime, was absolute evil, and there is no point in having power and being a superpower if you're not willing to use that power to take out absolute evil.
The realpolitik sort of answer to what you're talking about, the morality of everything, would be, there are lots of governments which are abhorrent around the world, including China, Russia, North Korea. I mean, even our allies in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, for example, they don't have a great human rights record, nor does Turkey. But yet we have to make accommodations with unpleasant people in order to make the world function, in order to have, oil supplies, in order to have international trade, in order to not have these so-called forever wars, which so many Americans have been frustrated with, spending so much of, taxpayer money that Americans have earned in Afghanistan, which was a complete disaster, in Iraq, which was also a disaster. So do you not see that point of view of, we need to decide what's in America's interests? Obviously, the morality is important, but ultimately what really matters is, does this help Americans? Is this going to cause chaos? Are we going to be in this war for a long time? Because, what do you think about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? Do you think that they were successful? I mean, could this be another repetition of that?
The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were poorly defined. The administration and the alliances in Europe and elsewhere, they absolutely refused to define what the problem was. In 25, this is how I came into fame or infamy, however you want to put it. I said, we're fighting against the theology of Islamic dominance. I was completely shut down. If I was advising President George Bush, whom I completely love and respect and has become a dear friend, If I was advising him in 2001, I would not have told him to go to Afghanistan. I would not have told him to go to Iraq. But that's what he did. Why did he do it? Because again, and Stephen, this is so important, and we're being confronted with it again. The advisors to President Bush at the time, they were defining the problem in a material way. They completely ignored and bypassed the theological, spiritual, moral declaration of war that was made on the West. So they went into Afghanistan. They went eventually into Iraq and so on. And of course, those wars failed. What I see happening now with Operation Epic Fury is that is not how we're going to define these wars. We're simply going to look at, and I think we now know much more about what the Islamist regime of Iran is all about. You can see what they did to their own people. But this last thing was kicked off by October 7, 2023. When October 7 happened, and I saw those images, my first reaction was, how on earth can we live on the same planet with these people? People who believe in this and who act in this way, how can we share the planet with them? We can't. I think that's what happened. And I think they thought they were going to derail the Abraham Accords, which was this normalization of relationships between Arab and Israelis, again, based on materialism. But they were confronted with the spiritual, moral, and theological aspect of it. And this is how it's playing out. So how do I explain it? I will say you cannot win economically or naturally or in any other material way if you don't understand that you are engaged in a moral, spiritual, and theological conflict.
How does one wage such a theological war against radical Islam practically?
I think practically is the easy part because we're blowing everything up that they have. They don't have a navy, they don't have an army, they don't have a succession plan. I think I'm an American, so we're going to come away from this thinking, yoo-hoo, we blew everything away. And here's where we're at a crossroads. If this victory, and we have victory, this is the joint coalition between Israel and America. If we come away from this and we start, whoever comes to govern Iran, if they govern it around only material aims, we're screwed. It's not going to work. We have to assert our moral and spiritual superiority. That is, I hope, what comes out of this. And if it ultimately what comes out of it, not this week, not next week, but ultimately I think this is what comes out of it. America is fighting a righteous war. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, they have to explain the righteousness of this war beyond just we blew stuff up.
There needs to be a plan though, doesn't there? Because if there's no boots on the ground and you remove the leadership of the Iranian regime, presumably another Iranian radical will simply take the place of the previous one. So there needs to be a plan. If you want to do regime change, you need to have a practical plan. And it doesn't look from the outside that America is willing to go in like they did in Iraq and Afghanistan and actually try and do this regime change with American troops.
I think you keep comparing it to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I want to keep comparing it to Japan, and Germany. I don't think we gave them a moral choice. I think we understood during the Second World War that we were dealing with moral absolutes. The moral absolutes that the Japanese were fighting for, the moral absolutes that Hitler and his cohort was fighting for, the moral absolute that we were fighting for. And we didn't give them a choice. And we imposed upon them and said, when we win, this is who we are, and this is how you're going to conduct your affairs. And it was a success, a huge success. Japan is, I've just been there, is an amazing country. Germany, except that now, I don't know, the spines are melting down, but they've become an amazing, productive country. It's the exact same thing. What is beautiful about what we're doing now in Iran is, within Iran is the largest growing Christian ground church, under church, whatever, but it's like the largest number of Christians in the world in proportion to the population apparently is taking place in Iran. So we don't even really need to have a great deal of moral persuasion. They're there. One thing I know is they've rejected Islam. If there's one place where Islam, putting it mildly, is not welcome, that will be Iran. And so I repeat again, once Iran is liberated, the rest of the Middle East, Lebanon is going to follow, the UAE, I think it's just going to be, let me just qualify it, radical political Islam is going to be kicked out of the Middle East. And so I keep harping on my warning. Where will they go? They will come to Europe. And it seems to me as if the Europeans are not prepared. May I say it again, dear leaders of Europe, please be prepared. They are coming to you.
I want to bring it back to Britain and domestic politics here, and it all links in. So obviously Reform is the biggest party in the opinion polls. Do you think Nigel Farage is taking this issue seriously enough of radical Islam? He's spoken about in an interview a couple of years ago not wanting to alienate Muslim voters. Maybe he's changed his position. Have you spoken to him about this? What do you think of Farage and Reform's position?
I don't know Nigel Farage at all. The way I analyze parties in 2025, 2026 right now is simply to say you can no longer try and stay in this center part where you try and court this side and court that side. You have to be absolutely clear about who you are, why you want power, and if you're asking the electorate to give you power, what you're going to do with it. I have my own criteria, and I look at this and I think, I do not think Nigel Farage passes that, because if he makes the same calculations that the existing political parties make, then he's just not different. If he, and this is the one thing that everybody's going to look at, United Kingdom, France, Germany, any of these countries, if you as a political challenger, you come in and you say, I'm going to rely on that immigrant vote, that Muslim voting bloc, you don't make sense. I might as well stay with the existing political parties. So I'm looking at Advance UK, Rupert Law, Restore Britain. Those are the individuals that I think are going to carry the day, because they're offering something radically different. They're saying, we don't have, they're startup political parties. People go, oh, what if they fragment the electorate? I think we're 2 or 3 years out. that's too long into the future. First, let's get our priorities straight. And the party that deserves, and this is how Donald Trump won. Donald Trump did not win because he had flowery, poetic expressions of what he was all about. He had this to-do list almost. I'm going to close the border. I'm going to drain the swamp. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. It's that type of clarity, I think, that is going to get people excited about wanting to vote. And I'm talking about people who've never voted before, people who've lost interest in institutions, who have no trust in any of the institutions. So I look at Rupert Law, I look at Ben Habib, and I think if I were a voter in Britain, those are the people I'd be more excited about. Same in Germany, same in France. I'm not interested in the existing parties. They have let me down so many times. I want them out.
Sticking with the theme of Rupert Lowe, his party has talked about banning the burqa, banning halal. Is that realistic? Is that something that you would support?
When I meet with Rupert Law, Ben Habib, any of the people who are doing this, I understand the symbolics of it, but I really want them to understand things like, why is it that women wear or are required to wear the burqa? Two reasons. One is political. One is religious theological. Religious theological, a woman has to hide her body, because if she doesn't hide her body, then a man has every right to rape her. The political aspect of it is she has to go dressed as she is across streets to evangelize. That is, in places where people are not Muslim, she has to go and show them this is what it looks like to be properly dressed. So if he says I'm going to ban it, I understand that what he's going to say is, no, this is Britain. That's not going to fly. I don't know. I mean, you always have, as a politician, you always have a list of priorities. To what extent that is a priority, but that sort of thing is easier said than done. Because how are you going to police that, etc.? But of course I get the sentiment. Okay.
Ayaan, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.